Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. And on this episode, we welcome back Jeff Bacon and Elliot Fishman of Catapult ERP. Elliot recently published a two-part piece on MSDW that explains how Catapult will adapt its business model to serve clients in a SaaS era that no longer aligns with older time and materials or fixed-price models for services delivery. With cloud provisioning, subscription pricing, and a trend away from customization and in favor of packaged add-on solutions, the changes are not just important to customers, Fishman believes, but they will be key to the success of services firms who want to survive in this era. I talked to Jeff and Elliot about what has changed in the services delivery space, what customers should be demanding of their enterprise software vendors, and what the future holds for Dynamics partners. Okay, Jeff, Elliot, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, nice to be here, Jason. Thanks for having us back.
Yep, great to have you both back. And I was interested to kind of take this conversation as a stepping off point from the two-part article, Elliot, that you published just recently on MS Dynamics World. Really an interesting, thought-provoking piece, kind of reflective of clearly some of the things that you've been thinking about internally about the impact that SaaS delivery has on ERP and CRM solutions and the changing expectations, changing business models that it's going to lead to. So, I mean, without me trying to summarize everything, I thought maybe we could just start off by me asking you to kind of talk a little bit about what are some of those discussions and what have you been doing to try to make sense of some of the changes that you're seeing, both internally with your customers and in the market, a bit broader?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, I can actually trace some of this thinking back to a conference and a book that was published by the Technology Services Industry Association. I think it was Thomas Law's book that really kind of identified the significant shift that SaaS technology presented for, in terms of the delivery model and the economic model and why that would pose challenges for IT services firms. And so specifically what they talked about was how in the past, customers would pay upfront for a large technology acquisition, and then the service provider's job was to basically come along and turn it on. But now in a SaaS world, customer is essentially paying on a consumption basis for software. So their software as a service basically means we're going to pay for this access to these capabilities based around some sort of consumption metrics, whether it's number of users over a period of time or modules of functionality, whatever the model is, it means that users are paying for consumption. And so the implication, they said, was that customer, and I think there was a lot of good foresight here. They said customers who are paying to access software capabilities on a consumption basis will eventually demand that the services that they consume as well to enable those software are also billed on an outcomes basis. Because ultimately, just as a customer doesn't really want to go out and buy software just to own software, that was the way they had to do it. Now they can pay to access software because they want access to those capabilities. But getting those capabilities live and operational means using consultants for the most part. And so, we've started to see evidence in our business, and we can talk about that separately, that that customers' expectations are changing, and that, when we're talking about cloud services and cloud technology, they want to pay for the outcome. They want live operational software that is having a positive impact on their business in terms of process efficiency, revenue generation, and any other number of metrics. So, there's a lot of pressure just from the market around what their expectations are.
Yeah, that market pressure, I imagine, is, and there's got to be a part of me that thinks that, and I think you alluded to this. I mean, I don't think companies have ever been really happy with the idea of, paying for time and materials and sort of hoping that is an investment in an outcome that they can then turn back around and justify, down the road. And it would seem to me that seeing this ability, feeling more empowered with SaaS solutions and payment models, then maybe is the catalyst for customers being much more maybe forthright with wanting to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at the classic way that consultants engage with customers, it's unfortunately been a risky enterprise for customers. Well, in fact, I think they've always kind of borne most of the risk in these engagements because there hasn't been a way to effectively have consultants put a lot of skin in the game, so to speak. I think there's always been best intentions, and certainly don't think there's been any attempt to evade accountability per se. But as you approach some sort of new implementation scenario, for example, you do your best to understand the scope and understand the effort that is going to attach to that. That drives your estimate. And of course, scope does evolve. Requirements, you surface new requirements once you begin the project. And, that usually starts the process of an expanding budget, a lengthening schedule. And, before you know it, it's easy to have a project that, has gone on a lot longer than expected and consumed more budget than expected, and so the expectations that the client had at the beginning don't get met. And, there's really been no answer to that. I think in general, we've certainly tried to link our fees to milestones, or we've done engagements on a fixed fee basis on occasion, but that sort of depends on having a lot of certainty about the implementation and things like that. And it's been challenging. So, I think now though, we have to respond, because I think customers, we're certainly seeing the evidence in our business. I'll let Jeff can speak to this, because I think Jeff deals with a lot of new client onboarding and acquisition. And there's been a lot of pushback to traditional approaches, particularly when we come in and say, well, before we can actually give you a proposal to implement Microsoft Dynamics, we need to engage in an analysis and scoping project that's going to cost X. And at the end of that project, we can give you a project plan and a charter and an implementation budget. The expectation is, hey, you guys live in this world all the time. You must know this stuff. Can't we have a few conversations and focus in on the key variables and parameters, and then you tell us up front what it's going to cost? They want the predictability that that the cloud implies. The cloud implies that it's going to be easy and predictable, and that you're going to get business outcomes, and you're going to pay for those outcomes. So the expectation from the customers is, tell us how much this is going to cost. We want to know.
Yeah, you talk about, I think risk is clearly and understandably a big component of it from, I would say, the service provider side of things. And you alluded to this, but where is that risk being, let's say, mitigated or cut down in? I mean, clearly, I think one of the most obvious ways is, well, SaaS, the standing up a system or provisioning it is, if not trivial, it's a lot easier than it would have been in a world where you walked in with a binder full of CDs or DVDs that had to be installed one after another, as in the olden days. But is there more to it than that in terms of what solutions offer today than even, let's say 2 years ago? Because Jeff, especially on the CRM side, I would guess that more than half of companies have been doing on-prem. Have been doing sort of SaaS CRM for some number of years now.
Yeah, I'll certainly take that. You're exactly right. I think our client base, 90% of our clients are running CRM online. But I think to answer your question around risk, what's happening is not so much any longer where we alluded, or Elliot and yourself alluded to this before, where, before you even start a project, you have to do an analysis. Before you actually even start that implementation, you're going to buy software, you're going to buy hardware. So even before you get going, let's call that somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 to $100,000 in investment in the hardware, investment in analysis. So in that process in its own right is risk. And what we're seeing more and more with clients is they don't want that complexity, and they want to kind of do away with that. And so part of the process with SaaS is now they can make a bet where, it costs $55 or $75 per user per month to start with a basic ERP implementation, right? So we can actually fire up an instance. It costs them $550 a year or something like that to actually have one instance of this. So the risk in actually making this decision is almost gone now with regards to a SaaS-based world. And as part of that, we're able to kind of bundle the implementation to saying, great, these are the things that are going to be included. But as we go, and if we miss anything, we can also layer in a level of support for optimization, enhancements, and create a bit more of a programmatic engagement for our clients. So just in that way, we can reduce risk that used to exist all over the place in these implementations. So really, it's through the software subscription itself, what SaaS actually really implies, and then in addition to that, how we engage with the client is, I would say, a little bit more iterative or a little bit more collaborative than, okay, let's go away, do some assessment. Now let's assess what the risk looks like, and then start picking away at scope in the old days where, wow, that seems a little bigger in the budget, so let's get it down to the, you're losing complexity. All of these kind of things add to, I think, our clients' preference for more cloud-based solutions, because to be honest, it's a lot easier and a lot less risky.
What about the customization versus sort of add-on solution side of it? Is that playing into it too? That more out of the box add-ons are being used these days, or not?
Yeah, I think again, the CRM world is probably more used to it. The platform itself lends itself to saying, it can be fully tailored and customized, and you can port those over. But in the NAV world, extensions are now how we actually would be able to customize. But more and more, we're seeing our clients' preference leaning towards, let's get this up and operational. Let's not get into designing a snowflake process just because we think we're unique. We'll actually have more process governance saying, well, what does the software provide? And let's work with that rather than actually saying, great, we need to design our process. So we are seeing, for sure, times when we have to customize or add extensions or add, kind of third-party add-ons. But at the same time, we're also seeing our clients' expectation in saying, they'll come to us and say, our guiding principles, we want to minimize customization as much as possible. Whereas I think, 2 or 3 years ago, it was very different. It was like, hey, we're unique and we want to customize based on this because we understand the platform allows us to do this. So what we're seeing, in our own business is kind of that development flow. Our developers used to be the busiest guys in our business, but we're seeing way more functional and solution consultants rather than development. And development's really to do things like integration, creating things like migration scripts. It's kind of moving away from the core code unit customization that we. And I think that's more implicit in the mid-market. We also heard from another partner who are more in enterprise that they've got a business, that's all they focus on. So I think it really depends on that customer segment and what the customers really are preferring.
That's interesting, and I do want to talk about that a little bit more, because I was thinking before we started talking in terms of the approach that you've sort of laid out. Seems like it would have implications for the way a company like yours is, either the kind of personnel you have on hand or other things about the way you run the business that are going to be just different to some degree in using the model that you're proposing and planning to use to approach it. You mentioned, maybe more need for, maybe more strategic roles than before. Can you talk any more about either changes you've already made or changes you foresee?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I was just to build on kind of what Jeff was saying about being able to leverage more out of the box capabilities and sort of bias towards standard functionality over customization, which of course impacts staffing profiles and things. One insight that we've kind of generated or belief that we've come to is that ERP capabilities, CRM capabilities, in whatever form, whether you're talking about, individual apps or entire platforms like Dynamics NAV, for example, they're not seen by customers, at least in the mid-size business segment that we focus on, to be as strategic as they once were. And I know some people might react very strongly to that statement. Of course, being efficient with technology in the back and how you manage your process is necessarily strategic. However, what I mean by that is, we don't hear customers talking about reinventing their business or transforming their businesses using ERP and CRM systems anymore. It's kind of become, I hate to say it, but it's become a component of technology infrastructure that companies of all sizes see as necessary in order to run their business. And some, of course, are more progressive with their approach to it than others. But it's like, if you're going to be a company doing business at any point, at any size, nowadays, you need to be able to operate using a consolidated systems, ERP systems, CRM systems, and have good, well-functioning business processes. And more than that, you need to be thinking about how to engage your customer as well as other stakeholders like suppliers or other people in your sort of value chain through digital channels. And so we're seeing that digital engagement, it seems to be driving a lot of the decisions nowadays. It's not so much we need to become more efficient, so we need an ERP system. We need an ERP system that will connect with our e-commerce strategy or our mobile. We have a need to do mobile field service, and so we need a platform that supports that. So it's kind of very specialized use cases that are strategic, whereas the back office capabilities, hey, we need to implement the ERP system. That's just it's sort of becoming standard functionality. It's like email and document files and document management. It's not. We're not seeing it as I think customers aren't putting as much of a premium on it as they once did. And so to answer your question about changes in our business, yeah, for sure, things like staffing profiles are starting to evolve. We used to be a business 100% made up of very senior, very experienced consultants with, usually a decade of client-side experience, followed by another decade of consulting experience and a long list of, and maybe some industry qualifications too. Now what we're finding is that we can reoptimize, we have a need to reoptimize our business around kind of more of a leveraged model where, of course, we have senior people and solution leaders and people who really understand functionality at a detailed level. But more and more, we find that we can be efficient by staffing more entry-level positions who are supported by senior consultants who provide solution direction, architecture, quality assurance, and who make sure that what we're developing, what we're delivering, maps back to client needs. And so that's interesting for a number of reasons, because we can, it's always been, career paths in our industry have never been the kinds of things that are articulated in university programs, for example. Nobody says, hey, you could become a Microsoft Dynamics consultant. It's like something people sort of found themselves doing after many, many years, but now we can sort of show up at the career fairs and at the recruiting fairs and talk about these career paths. And we actually have a way of, we have meaningful work that we can engage people in at much earlier stages of their career than we ever could before.
Mm-hmm. I remember a couple of years ago, we had a job posting for a senior consultant, and it explicit in that job posting was had to have experience with SQL, had to have experience with servers and Windows technology. Today, that's not even that relevant. Really, what we're talking about is application, level consulting and business domain knowledge. All of these technologies that used to be super important to our guys and understanding that role is just gone simply due to the fact that with new Business Central or Dynamics 365, sales, service, customer engagement, etc., it's literally a 15-minute process to spin up an environment and get that going and available. So all of these kind of high dependencies on technology, we really kind of untethered it from this boxes and wires approach. So we ourselves are allowed to focus on the business domain, which in turn allows us to actually add more value to our client engagements because we're having business discussions rather than worried about how do we spark up the technology.
All right. Well, that's a great point. I mean, it's funny that I think Elliot, you were saying, trying to explain job descriptions to prospective new hires out of college who don't really see it's not like a known job that they it also reminds me of trying to explain, what I do to a relative who, or maybe I don't know if you've experienced this one, but it's kind of.
You're like Chandler Bing.
Yeah, I experience that every day. I mean, it's like whether when I'm talking to family or you have my children, friends, you end up sort of dumbing it down. It's like, well, I'm in IT, and then next thing of course, you're troubleshooting their computer.
Yeah, right. What's wrong with my browser?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, anything that gets you closer to an understandable job title, I think is a bonus for anyone in this, for anyone in this space.
Yeah, and it is really cool. Like, I think among many goals that I think have been important in our industry, or puzzles we haven't solved, including this sort of value-based billing and shared accountability stuff. Is how do we create meaningful career paths? How do we get out of being an industry that's only staffed with unicorns, frankly, where we can only we have to go out and look for these rare breeds of people who combine business credentials like CPAs and hands-on experience with supply chain management or manufacturing with technology savvy and also a knack for dealing with clients and eliciting requirements and making and creating compelling a compelling vision and building consensus. Like, these are all these like weird skills that don't really go together. You've got like this sort of client facing stuff and this technology stuff, and then this, kind of geeky business stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We used to find that, those people are really rare, and they still are, but now combination of the technology and then the delivery model, we can offer meaningful, we can onboard people at a much earlier stage and give them really meaningful work and a career path around that stuff.
But now part of the being in the kind of front lines with clients, it's interesting as we're putting out more subscription-based proposals, just seeing the reaction to clients. Some of them actually get it. They totally understand, like a 3-year term, I get everything. I don't need to worry about it. Others who are more, I would say, kind of more aligned to traditional accountants, they want to break it down in the same way that they always broke it down. How many hours is that? And what do I get? And how much is a project? And they kind of want to recognize it in project terms. So there's a real kind of mixed result that we're getting from our clients around this type of thing, because their still thoughts are that this is a big hairy problem and a big project they need to deal with and capitalize a bunch of software. And then we get into starting to discuss, it's like, hey, it takes give me your credit card, I'll get this spun up in a half hour and I'll charge you $100 kind of thing. It's a very different kind of proposal and a very different idea than what a lot of our clients actually even think about in terms of the software and the experience that they're coming from.
Yeah. Do you have to break that? Do you have to do some kind of? It's interesting to hear that you already are propose, and this gets into maybe the second part of your piece, where you actually break down the 8 steps or 8 components of what these sort of new engagement, this new model is going to look like. Do you find, since you are talking to clients about it and using it already, that you have to sort of do side-by-side comparisons? If we did this the traditional way that you are talking about, here's where we might land in terms of cost, and if we do it this way, here's where we learn to, well, not just cost, in terms of services delivered, in terms of, outcome, the way we're oriented toward outcomes. Do you have to make those comparisons a lot of the time?
Yeah, we do. And like initially we start off and we're like, hey, we're just going to sell this way. This is just what we're going to do. But what we realized is, of course, clients that were used to being, we used to have a transaction model, and they had a way that they're used to buying. And so really we need to kind of start, I would say, just kind of educating them and getting them used to this new world in a way. But yeah, absolutely. For those clients that are interested or even need to kind of look at things in a project and how a project's built up, they need that, I guess, level of comfort. Because when we just kind of come in and say, hey, it's $29.50 a month and it includes all this stuff, they want to try to rationalize that back down into hours and how much does the software cost and all these kind of things. When it's a very different proposition, we start talking about service level agreements, we talk about setup, we talk about white glove service. It's a very different equation. We're talking hours and a unit of measure, and the other one is a service and a commitment to that service and a commitment to objectives. It's really apples and oranges. It's even hard to compare side by side, to be honest.
The element of it that seems to that struck me at first was, at least for people who have been through their share of enterprise software projects, and how big and difficult and painful they can be, especially that last mile of getting to a really successful outcome, even if all the software gets installed and all that, is the how much of the resources go into those things that were sort of not really strategic, how much of the money and the budget was sunk into that, and how little was left at the end to do the really meaningful stuff, the user adoption and training and responsiveness as it rolls out, right? And it just makes me wonder, like, well, how much more of that you can demonstrate is going to be put toward those kind of really high value things now.
Well, typically that stuff didn't get done at all. I mean, we, as you know, our business is focused on long-term support and post-live support for a long time, because we've always had a belief that that's when the magic happens. You get to go live, you're not in some amazing new position to all of a sudden be way more productive and efficient than you ever were. You're kind of in a deficit position. You've depleted the bank account. Everybody's emotionally exhausted from a project. Well, and you've got this, and you're overwhelmed with new capabilities.
It's kind of like a Hollywood wedding movie, right? Like everybody, it's a big lead up, and you have all this drama and trials and tribulation, and then yay, you reach the altar and confetti, and then end of the movie. The reality is that's not at all what the long-term engagement of an ERP or CRM system is. It's really about optimization and how do you actually make it work, and it's a commitment to this.
And back to the point about how customization versus standard functionality. We're really advocating for highly standardized, highly prescriptive, not pre-configured, definitely tailor-made implementations. But we want to get to go live as quickly as possible, because we with core meet core operational needs, because we really find that once our customers are live and using the software, then their understanding of what their needs are and how the software can support the business and how to adapt it and evolve it really starts to make a lot more sense than the sort of traditional waterfall approach of let's get behind the whiteboard in front of the whiteboard and map all this stuff out and have requirements documents and system specifications, and then the reality, as Jeff says, like, okay, well, now we're live. Did we design a good system or not? And oftentimes the answer is, well,
we'll find out in 6 months.
Yeah. And so again, some of what you talked about, what's interesting, even with the shift in the technology, as I spoke about before, where even before you get started, you've invested $80,000 in a server and a test environment, et cetera. Now we can actually pull forward a lot of this kind of design and actually more interface design very, very inexpensively, because we're not actually talking servers and software, et cetera. It's a subscription. One subscription for, as I said, maybe $500 or $600 a year. And we can start to design, but do iterative design with the actual platform and solution in place in front of the client without investment. So even our methodologies are changing so that we're becoming a little bit more iterative and what they would call agile. We're able to show something really quickly and change it super quickly, as opposed to doing this massive documentation process going, well, let's talk about how this works. And here's a Visio diagram to describe your process. And then we'll go ahead and design it, right? It's a lot more quick, it's a lot more agile, it's a lot more interactive with the client as well. So we're seeing lots of benefits that way. So rather than binding up a whole bunch of these solutions and then the end user actually gets to experience it in UAT, we're actually getting to that a lot sooner. So we're getting feedback a lot sooner and getting a better end result through the engagement and the methodology using SaaS-based tools. So it shifts kind of everything that we get engaged with, including how we've even set up an initial solution.
That's really interesting to hear you say. I had that thought came across my mind as you were talking about. Maybe that does line up more companies to use more agile principles in their projects. So it sounds like that's definitely the case, which is pretty interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about maybe, if you wouldn't mind, a couple of the points that were in sort of the 8-point plan,
Sure.
Elliot, that you laid out in your piece. And I don't know if we have time to just kind of run through the whole thing in detail, but I'm just looking here at, we talked a little bit about this idea of subscribing to a solution that's, like you talked about, has some real differences to what a lot of people are used to if they've been around IT for a long time and enterprise software for a long time. A couple others that sort of struck me. One is you're really looking to connect from the CEO down at the customer and keep sort of the parallel connections throughout the organization, from the service from you directly, I guess, Elliot, as CEO, to your clients, CEO level or C-level representative.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is that, I can't take credit, and we as a company can't take credit for this kind of this model in IT. I think there is a precedent in other domains outside of ERP and CRM. I'll give you an example. The internet-based phone service we're talking on right now is a SaaS-based solution. We pay on a per user per month basis for access to this phone system with a whole bunch of capabilities, mobile apps and a portal and voicemail and, call routing and all this stuff. Now, when we talked to the company who provided it about acquiring it, they gave me a proposal for a multi-year subscription that was based on, the number of users, of course. Now, we had to go through a fairly structured methodology-driven implementation process where expert consultants from their team met with me and facilitated a workshop and said, okay, today we're going to talk about users. And I left with a homework assignment. I had to go and fill out some spreadsheets and figure out what my user, and I came back and I said, okay, I've got that. And they said, great. So this is how we configure it. So we configured that stuff. They said, now we're going to talk about call groupings. And so, we went through this methodology, but at no point, and eventually we got live, no problem. And, when we have an issue, whether it's a technical issue, or trying to set something up, we pick up the phone and we call the provider. We don't get a bill for it. We don't, nobody sends us an invoice or asks for, says, okay, well, in order to give you some support, we're going to have to charge you. It's all part of the subscription package that I signed up for when we acquired the system. And so, this is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. We're basically saying, we think that customers should have that same experience when they're implementing ERP and CRM solutions as well. We shouldn't have to
separate concepts like, well, here's the fee for implementation from here's the fee for support, and here's the fee for making sure that your users are happy, and here's the fee for the licensing. It's just bundled. It's a single fee based on consumption that includes everything, which requires that, we have to plan it carefully and make sure that we manage the cost side of it, and we're clear about what's in scope and what's not in scope. And to your question specifically, it requires a higher level of engagement and commitment than we have typically been accustomed to. We can't, so there's more homework, there's more, hey, we're going to meet with your team. We're going to give you some homework to go find it, produce, fill out some spreadsheets, produce lists of, your items, for example, of inventory, and talk about, we have to gather the information collaboratively and really follow a structured methodology. And if at any point in the process, your people, the client's people, are not available or are not engaged, then it doesn't work and it starts to break down. And so that's why, that engagement has to be there, and even at the leadership level, at least as we get comfortable with this model and we start getting some practice rolling this out, I think, the people on the client side need to feel that they have the mandate and the permission to spend the time and to put the effort in to get this done. And that has to come from their leadership. And, I think that and then similarly, I have to empower my team to do what's necessary to get the customer across their milestones, and not get overly caught up in details like billable hours and how much time this is taking.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make. Is it as Elliot's speaking, hopefully it highlights the point that this is a real shift. This is pay for a service and an outcome. It is not about paying for hours, right? Which is traditionally where our industry has been, which is great. One billable hour equals 1 unit of something that I'm going to pay for. So again, I think it's largely based on the audience. I.e., we all kind of interface with accountants, and they like to count stuff. So I think that's really where it's come from. But at the same time, it creates a lot of problems because a billable hour is just a unit of measure for us to build up a price for a fee for some service we offer, right? So this is really kind of moving in a direction that we want a phone system not only to be set up, but we also want a phone system to work. And that's really the same kind of principle here with ERP or CRM. Not only do we want you to set this up, we want it to work. And so those are really the objectives that we're trying to accomplish with, kind of our fully bundled service, which includes setup and support and subscription and, everything else along the way.
Have you had much feedback or insight from other service providers out there who I mean, I know it's a fairly close community, and especially in the Microsoft channel. Or do you get the sense that other company, what other companies either think of what you've already kind of put out there with this stuff, or hearing what they're doing in comparison? Because I mean, if there's one common theme, it's touching on what you just mentioned, which is kind of transitioning from from one model to another, where SaaS doesn't demand maybe as much upfront investment that the partner sees a piece of, or other considerations like that, where it forces your model to change in some way, right?
I would say not directly in our Dynamics channel. We've seen lots of evidence with companies that we're friendly with, say that deal with kind of SharePoint or Office, and they're going about building their businesses around this type of model. Specifically in our Dynamics channel, I think it's a kind of mind-blowing concept, to be honest. I'm not really sure why, but I think at least in our world and in our part of the country, we're seeing more traditional kind of, you pay for a solution that is small, medium, large, or it's a bundled solution and it's X dollars. That's kind of more the approach I think our competitors and people on the channel are taking, where, hey, we're selling something and it looks and smells more like a solution or bundled IP, as opposed to a kind of, I would say, a fee for service, right? So, which is a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as well, just to build on that, I agree completely. In the Microsoft Dynamics channel, I have not had a single conversation or seen any evidence of partners who are, looking at different engagement models like this. That's not to say it's not happening. I will say that we are part of other software companies, like we do some business with other ERP solutions outside of Microsoft that have never had a legacy on-premise solution. So some companies that have cloud ERP solutions that were built from scratch in the cloud and are only available on a SaaS model. And there's quite a bit more progressive thinking in their channel. I would say as well. Not a lot of their partners have experience yet, but there's a very active and lively dialogue going on about this, and that company is encouraging partners to really take this seriously and really think about it. In some ways, I wouldn't say we got the idea from them, but it came about as a result of some of the conversations we were having in that channel. And then we sort of looked at our business and said, well, this applies in any SaaS context, not just the one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any feedback from Microsoft directly on where you're going with this?
They don't care.
If you can make it work, right?
Ultimately they just want us to sell more volume, right? And so if our pricing is attractive to clients and we're sparking up new clients because we've got interesting ways to engage, they'll be all for it.
Yeah, I mean, the message from software companies, when you're a services company in a partner channel, the message from the software company is, they're focused on volume, as Jeff said, and so services can sometimes be perceived at the software company as an obstacle or impediment to closing a software deal. Because if you're negotiating this, large implementation, that can slow down. That might mean that your deal might slip and not close before the end of the quarter. That kind of thing gets software companies kind of upset. So we're always getting the sort of gentle pushback that, hey, if there were a way to make it easier for the company to buy, and if your services weren't so darn expensive, we'd get more software deals. So there's some truth in that. And so I think that although we haven't had direct feedback, I should think that companies like Microsoft would be very pleased that partners are innovating around lowering the barriers for customers to make decisions. And particularly again in this mid-sized business segment where budgets are thin, and we're talking about businesses, especially in the sort of $20 to $200 million range, where they don't necessarily have a couple $100,000 sitting around to do an implementation. When you can find a way to turn everything into essentially a subscription deal and bundle all of it, it makes it much easier for them to think about engaging quickly. They don't have to come up with quite as much money up front.
Well, I certainly look forward to seeing what other people, how people respond, customers, partners alike. I think there's, I would say you're not Elliot, your piece isn't the first to raise this idea that things have to change, that the status quo or the older ways of engaging aren't really going to be able to live on forever. But I really like that, you put some really concrete ideas and principles out there and ways to approach some of these challenges. And I'm really eager to see sort of how readers react, on both sides, on the customer side and the partner side. And I look forward to sort of catching up with you guys again and seeing what you've been hearing, from your clients, from new clients, from the partner channel, because I know these. People in the partner channel obviously chat and share ideas as time goes on here. So, interesting times and an interesting perspective. Thanks. I appreciate you guys sharing it with me today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. We're ultimately, we get dragged into evolution from what our clients, kind of demand. So we'll absolutely keep you informed as we go.
Yeah, you can't stand still. All right, great. Well, Jeff, Elliot, thank you both so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Cool.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting us. Always fun to chat.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Jeff Bacon and Elliot Fishman of Catapult ERP for joining me today. If you want to reach me, send me an email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.